So actually, before we jump right in, we wanted to just give a chance for everybody to download our standard grant guidelines from our valleywater.org /grants website. And I think the link was just put in the chat. So our entire presentation today is going to be based on the format of the standard grant guidelines to provide additional information and some tips and tricks from our team for those looking to submit a grant proposal this year. If you're not able to do that right now, that's fine. On each of the slides that we have today, we have a reference page number in the standard grant guidelines. So we strongly encourage that you go take a look at that after today's presentation. Okay, next slide. All right. So we'll officially get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the very first Standard Grants Informational Workshop of this year. So my name is Kristen Yasukawa, and I'm the Community Benefits Program Administrator, and I work on the Safe Clean Water Grants and Partnerships Program and our Public Art Program. And we are very excited to share this year's grant funding opportunities. And as I mentioned, we'll give tips along the way so that you can develop a strong proposal. There's a lot of new things we're going to talk about for this year's grant funding, and there's a lot to cover. But first, I would like to introduce our new grants team, and I'm excited that we can officially call it a full team now. So I will hand it to Amy first.
Hey everybody, I'm Amy Fonseca. I am a Senior Management Analyst with the Grants and Partnership Program. Some of you may know me if you already have a grant with us, and I'm excited to be here and look forward to providing some tips and tricks for you. I'll pass it to Peggy.
Good morning everyone, Peggy Lamb, Management Analyst in the Civic Engagement Unit. Some of you here might also know me if you have a mini grant, so happy to have you all here.
All right, can we have Renee, please?
Good morning, everyone. Rene Moreno, Management Analyst for the Grants and Partnership Team, primarily supporting the grants and the Public Arts Program. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Albert.
Good morning, everyone. You heard from me earlier. I'm with the grants team as a staff analyst. I am overseeing the water bottle filling station program in the future is coming up. Glad to meet you all. And I'm handing it off to our team member, Robert.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Marmito, and I am an intern for the Grants and Partnerships Program, and I'm excited to have everyone here with us this morning.
And then I'm not sure if you're still here, Sherilyn, but Sherilyn Tran is also on, and she is our unit manager to oversee the whole program. I don't know if she's still on. All right.
Oh, good morning. Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sherilyn Tran. I'm really excited to see so many folks here on the call to learn more about all the opportunities that we have coming up. So as they said, my name is Sherilyn Tran. I am the Civic Engagement Manager.
Thanks, Sherilyn. Sorry to put you on the spot. All right, and then we also have today joining us some Valley Water subject matter experts because there are some technical aspects of our grant funding opportunities. So I'd like to see if David, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good morning, my name is David Cahan, and I am the risk manager here at Valley Water and in the subject matter for the insurance issues.
Great, and then I think we have Lisa as well.
Hello, my name is Lisa Brancatelli, and I'm with the Community Projects Review Unit, and I'm here to answer any questions regarding encroachment permits.
Thank you. And Michael?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Lee. I am an environmental planner with the Environmental Planning Unit here at Valley Water, and I will be assisting with any environmental review of your grants.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. And we hope that all of the attendees out there ask your questions today because we do have everybody on the line. All right, so we can get going into our agenda. All right, so I'm not going to read this slide, but this is our agenda today. basically what you can see is that we have a lot of information to cover. Again, we encourage you to follow along with our standard grants guidelines document, because that's the official document that has all the fine print and all the detailed information about our grant funding opportunities. And then just so that you know as well, our presentation slides that you'll see today and a recording of this workshop will also be posted on our website. And then our team is open to taking questions throughout the presentation. So if anything comes up, please raise your hand and one of our team members can call on you. And you can also put a question in the Q&A feature down below. But please, if you do have a question, please do not use the chat. Great. Okay, so we have a couple overview slides here. So we are the Santa Clara Valley Water District, which is now known as Valley Water as of a couple years ago. And so Valley Water is a public agency, and we're a special district of the state of California. So we are most probably well known as the wholesale drinking water provider for Santa Clara County. So we're where your water comes from and the people behind your water. But we also manage our region's flood protection activities and work to create healthy creeks and ecosystems. So environmental stewardship is one of our mission. So these three pillars of Valley Water's mission is what each of our grant funding opportunities are based around. All right, next slide. So our outgoing grant funding opportunities are administered by our Grants and Partnerships program, which is everyone you've seen on the call today. And we're housed in the Office of Civic Engagement, which is in the External Affairs Division. And the Grants and Partnerships program was really developed to leverage our community resources for efficient use of funds and to increase partnerships and community engagement in stewardship activities. And this is because at Valley Water, we know that, we do way better when we work together as a community toward these common goals. And our grants are funded through a voter-approved special parcel tax called the Safe Clean Water and Natural Flood Protection Program. So next slide. So this special parcel tax is the funding source for grants. So it is taxpayer dollars. And that's why we have a lot of requirements for our grant programs, because we are stewards of public funds and have to follow a lot of requirements and laws and policies. So this Safe Clean Water special parcel tax was approved by voters in 2012, and it was last renewed in this past November in 2020. And so we're really excited about that, because that means the funding has been approved in perpetuity until repealed by voters. So there is no foreseeable end date to our funding. So we have annual amounts allocated. And the funding for grants in the renewal, which we call Measure S, and you might have seen that on the ballot. So grants is one of many different projects included in the Safe Clean Water program. So we can go to the next slide. So in the renewed Safe Clean Water program, there are now 6 priorities. Before there were 5. And for those of you who are current or returning grantees, you may remember that our Safe Clean Water grants program revolved around the priorities in the past. And we called them our bingo numbers of the different priority and project numbers and letters that were used for each grant funding opportunity. Well, now those are all gone, because all of the grant funding has been consolidated into one priority area, which is priority F. Next slide. So in priority F, this is the entire grant funding program. So the grant is project F9, Grants and Partnerships for Safe Clean Water, Flood Protection, and Environmental Stewardship. And there are 4 key performance indicators that talk about 4 different grant funding opportunities. So we have our standard grants, our mini grants, our partnerships, and then our bottle filling stations funding opportunities, which we'll talk about later. And so today, just to clarify, we are talking about the standard grants opportunity only. We'll touch on the mini grants and the bottle filling stations very briefly at the end. But this grant cycle is about standard grants, and standard grants are different from the other opportunities because they're a higher dollar amount available. They're only available during the annual cycle. They are not year round. It's a competitive selection process, and then the board approves all standard grant awards. All right, so for what's new, so again, if you're returning your current grantee, this might probably be the useful information for you, but here's a quick list of the things that are new for this year for standard grants. And we're calling this a transition year because Measure S allowed a lot more flexibility and has a little bit of a different organization to the grant funding that we've had in the past. And until we're able to implement all of those changes, we're kind of doing a hybrid approach of half of what we did in the previous Safe Clean Water program and half of things are new as a part of Measure S. So for this year, in this fiscal year 22 transition year, we've consolidated all the grant funding. So as I said, it's all housed in one priority area in Safe Clean Water now. And so that also cuts down on the maximums and the minimums per project that we had previously. So we have one total amount, so that has increased accessibility. And then we are carrying forward the same project criteria that we've had in the past. So all of that is open. Before, it used to be every other year a certain type of project criteria was available, but now everything is open. So that means all 5 project types. And this time around, we're giving 5-year agreement terms to every project, and that will be standard across the board. I know before it was either 2, 3, or 5 years, but we're just going to go with a standard 5-year. And then, as you can see, we're doing a pre-announcement of the grant cycle. So we've decided to take a different approach, and with the intent to help all of our prospective applicants learn about our program, understand the requirements and the criteria, and then give you time to put together a strong project proposal. So we're announcing our grant cycle opening a month ahead of the actual applications being opened. All right. Okay, so as I mentioned, funding for standard grants for this year. So now we have a total of $1.4 million for standard grants that are available. And again, that's open to any mix of project types with no minimum or maximum per project. However, it's really good to note that it is probably unlikely that, one project requesting $1.4 million, the total amount is going to be awarded at the full amount, because we really try to seek a diversity of project types and project locations and project sizes. So we try to look for equity and look for diversity in projects. Okay. Sorry, can we go back one more slide? Thanks. And part of to keep in mind with the funding is that our not all the projects that meet minimum requirements are guaranteed to be funded. So we'll go over all the minimum requirements today, but if you just meet that bar, it does not guarantee funding. And Amy will cover all of the scoring and everything later. And our Valley Water Board of Directors, again, they will approve all of the funding awards, and they can approve full or partial funding of the amount that was requested per project. And Amy will also cover how that's formulated, but that is just something to keep in mind as well. All right, next slide. Okay. So, again, general information about our funding. So all of the funds for standard grants are provided on a reimbursement basis. So just know when you're thinking of a project and putting together your project budget and estimated request amount, that we will only pay that out through the invoicing process on a reimbursement basis. And then when it comes to the final closeout of the project, we have the ability to withhold a 10% retention from the invoice if we are still waiting for the project to be completed. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have a total project, maybe the Valley Water funded portion is completed, but the total project isn't completed yet, we will withhold 10% until the total project is completed. And then we really want to stress that our funds cannot be used for any pre-award costs. So your time coming to this workshop, putting it together the application, potentially going to the board meeting when they, approve the funding, all of that cannot be included in the costs and in your budget. And then any proprietary work for which the results cannot be released to the public. So this again goes back to the fact that we're a public agency and the grant funding is taxpayer dollars. So everything we do, everything a part of the grants program is all needs to have public access.
Okay, so we have a question come through in the Q&A.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Dennis Murphy asked, I understand that partnerships are not being discussed today. Where can we find more info on this? Currently, there's this from the website. It's a link from May, I believe.
Yeah, if you are interested in a partnership opportunity, feel free to reach out directly to our grants team and we can talk about your specific project. So it's grants@valleywater.org. All right, were there any other questions? Okay. All right, so our first and really most important tip, which you'll hear throughout the presentation today, is to follow the standard grant guidelines. So this goes back to the funding recommendations are based on the evaluation criteria and the grant funding allocation matrix that's listed in the grant guidelines, and there's a different table for each project criteria type. And Amy will be reviewing that later in the presentation. Next slide. Okay, so you're on this workshop today, you're trying to figure out, am I eligible for this grant funding? So our applicants must be one of the following organizations on this list. So it's basically any type of public agency or nonprofit, any public or nonprofit school, or if you are a local nonprofit that has a fiscal sponsor or is sponsored by another nonprofit that possesses the actual 501c3 status, you will all be eligible. For water conservation research grants only, which is one of the 5 project criteria that we have available, that's the only opportunity where for-profit private entities are eligible. Next slide. Okay. And then you may also be thinking of what project is a good fit for this type of funding through this grant opportunity. So the projects that are eligible for our grant funds they must be located in Santa Clara County. So even if your organization might be in San Mateo County or other places in the US even, as long as the work and the actual project is located in Santa Clara County, that would be eligible. Every project has to demonstrate that they have matching funds of at least 25% of the total project cost. And that can be in monetary or in kind. So in kind could be in like volunteer labor hours, or you're bringing, your own staff hours to the table. And then the project must demonstrate that it can be fully completed within 5 years of the agreement effective date. And it's also good to know that if you have multiple projects that fit this eligibility, you are welcome to submit multiple project proposals. But only one grant may be awarded for each individual project. So if you have one project and it might have different phases, that would still be considered one project, and we could only award one grant for that project. All right, next slide. Okay, so these are the ineligible projects. We do not fund any feasibility studies or master plans or any mitigation or any activity that is a requirement of another agreement or another permit or anything like that. And then we don't fund any operations and maintenance. And then we probably rarely fund land acquisition. It's not eligible unless it's specifically deemed for use in habitat or restoration. Okay, so here's the timeline of our whole funding process for standard grants. So this doesn't include that we've done the announcement a month ahead and we're doing these informational workshops. Our applications are open online in our Flex Grants Management System on January 3rd. And once that opens, you can go in, you can take a look at the application and get started. Those applications are due March 4th. And through our Flex Grants Management System, that's the only way to submit an application proposal. So after March 4th, after the deadline closes, then Valley Water subject matter experts and potentially external subject matter experts outside of Valley Water will gather for each project criteria and review the applications against the evaluation criteria that's outlined in the standard grant guidelines. And Amy will touch on that too a little bit later. And then we take the funding based on the criteria scores from the panel and then the grant funding allocation matrix. Staff will take those funding recommendations to the board for approval. And so we're aiming to do that in May. So then shortly after that, we will notify all applicants of their funding status, if they were awarded and if they were awarded at what percentage of their request. And then following that, we will jump right into executing an agreement. So none of the work or invoicing or anything can start until after an agreement is executed. And that means that we put together a formal agreement that includes all insurance requirements, any additional documentation, and it has to be signed by the authorized signatory of both parties, so Valley Water and the authorized signatory of your applicant. And then following the agreement effective date. So this is actually something to clarify. So something new that we have been doing is that during the agreement execution and putting together the formal funding agreement, we usually will default to once the agreement is signed by both parties, that's the date that the agreement is effective. But if for some reason we need it to be earlier, there is the option to do a set agreement date. So that means we set in the agreement the date that the agreement is effective, and that can be a retroactive effective date. So that would definitely need to be talked through with our staff as well as some other internal approvers at Valley Water, but that is an option. But otherwise, if you're thinking of a project, I would not probably start any timeline or plan to start anything till potentially like July. All right. Next slide. Okay. Now I will, does anyone have any questions about anything we just covered? I'm happy to take those now, but otherwise, okay, I'm not seeing any. But otherwise, I'll hand it over to Amy and she's going to talk about the specific project types and the criteria.
Hey everybody, I'm Amy Fonseca again. Thanks for joining us. And today I'll be talking to you about the different grant criteria and the scoring, and then some of the application requirements. So we have a list if you're looking for grants that we've awarded in the past on our website. So we have a lot of different resources at valleywater.org/grants. So check out that list, and you'll see that we have a diversity of projects. We have so many different types of projects. So really the world is your oyster, as long as you fit within the 5 priority types, which I'll show you now. And if your project fits in multiple priority areas, it's best to just pick one. That's how your grant is going to be scored, your application. So first, we have water conservation research grants. So this is for identifying water saving devices and strategies that can assist Valley Water with its water conservation efforts. So some sample projects include developing water reduction technologies, researching cost effectiveness of different water conservation activities or technology, or developing educational outreach or materials to help the community conserve water. So the purpose of this grant type is for research. And it's not the same as our residential rebate program. So it wouldn't be for like, you know, products in your residential home or landscaping rebates or anything like that. If you are interested in those, check out our website or send us an email, we'll send you the link. But that is a separate program. This is the only grant type that's available for for-profit private entities. So just keep that in mind. So this is the only one. The others that follow are only open for nonprofit entities. So next slide. So here's one example of a project that we funded in the past. This was with Volectron LLC, and they studied these tiny flow faucet heads. So when you're washing your hands, it provides just as much force to compensate for the volume of water. So they did a study on these different technologies, and they were able to find that these faucet microstreams were 13 times better than a conventional faucet. So they shared their results with the community, and we found out some really good information and got some good recommendations on different water saving products. Next slide. The next one is our dipper well replacement project. So before I was involved in this project, I had no idea what a dipper well was. We worked with Fisher Nickel, and they were awarded a grant back in 2017. So a dipper well is when you go to a restaurant or a cafeteria or an ice cream parlor is usually where you'll see them. They keep the scoops in these little buckets that constantly run water, and that keeps it sanitized so that they can, you know, use it all day. And believe it or not, there are 100,000 dipper wells in California, and they use up to 500 gallons of water per day. So this replacement technology and report demonstrated that there was an average water savings of approximately 250 gallons per day. So this research was shared with commercial food services, and it really shows, you know, how creative you can be. Some things you don't even think about, who thinks about ice cream scoopers, but it does really have a big impact. So just keep that in mind. It's, like I said, the sky's the limit here. Next slide. Okay, the next project we have is the pollution prevention grants. And if you want to follow along, the pages are listed at the bottom of the screen there. See pages 19 through 25. So pollution prevention grants, for those of you who have applied with us before, were formerly the B3 grants. So these are grants intended to prevent contaminants and litter from entering the waterways and groundwater. So the purpose of this is to keep debris and contaminants out of the creeks, storm water, the bay, and the groundwater. And so some sample projects could include the proper disposal of some pharmaceuticals, auto products such as oil or gasoline, cleaning products, paints, light bulbs, batteries, electronic waste. So anything that we don't want to enter the waterways or the groundwater. Another idea is initiating an environmentally friendly gardening and composting techniques. We had a grantee do that. And then we also have provide public education to schools and communities, organizations about reducing contaminants in our waterways. And so when you're putting these grants together, one thing to keep in mind is that each grant can have different elements. It can have an implementation element, it can have, and then it could also have like an educational element. So you're not limited to just doing one activity. And so an example for this one, we had a company put in pharmaceutical waste bins so that people in the county could drop off their extra medication rather than putting it in the toilet or throwing it in the trash and contaminating the groundwater. Okay, next slide. All right, so one example is our grant agreement with the University of California and UCCE. They created a composting and demonstration site down at Emma Prush Park, which is in San Jose. Marshall Cottle Park, which is in San Jose as well. That's off of Snell Avenue. If you want to go check that one out, it's a very nice site, County Park, and then Gilroy High School. And they educated participants in proper composting so that manure and contaminants from animal waste wouldn't enter the groundwater or the stormwater. And then they also did some pathogen research and testing to prove that their methods of composting really did reduce contaminants and toxins from entering the waterways. So we do have a quick video. I'll go ahead and if we could share that quick video. There we go. Great. Thanks for sharing. And I wanted to give a shout out to Robert. He's our, puts together a lot of our videos. So super great. And we post a lot of those on Instagram, by the way, if you want to follow us, and other social media platforms. So one other interesting thing about that composting project is that they also found, though they didn't know this at the time when they planned the project, that decomposting with worms saves water. So you don't have to water the soil as much. So that was also a nice finding. Okay, next slide. Okay, next up we have volunteer cleanups and education. This was formerly B7. So this is for cleanup, education, outreach, and watershed stewardship activities. So this one really focuses on the community, volunteers, cleanup, and education. And you'll see there's a little bit of overlap between pollution prevention, the prior type, and this one. So when you're trying to decide which category your project would fit in, take a look at the guidelines and see, because it's going to be scored based on one of those. You don't have to be limited again to one activity. You could, for these type of projects, what's very popular with our grantees is to do a cleanup component, an education component, and then sometimes some event components. And so some examples include organizing cleanups with schools, developing curriculum, and then sharing that with schools, and then combining that with an activity that students can do. Next slide. So this is an example. This was the watershed education campaign we did with Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. And this project included 3 different components. So they did some outreach and education to children ages K through 12. And then they also provided stipends to transport the students to their water festival. They also have an aquarium there with different native animals and insects. So we helped with that effort, helped them maintain and install it. And then there's a beautiful mural on Coleman Avenue Bridge that you should definitely check out. I didn't bring a photo, but if you get a chance, it's really, really nice to check it out. It has some indigenous species. And then the next slide, this is another example. This was the Schools Going Green project that we had with the city of Sunnyvale. And we worked with middle school and high school students to clean up more than 4,000 pounds of litter during 98 cleanups. This included student-led campaigns that they created and delivered to help change and reduce littering behavior. And so this project actually won an award from the California Stormwater Quality Association, and it was recognized as an outstanding stormwater project. Next slide. Okay, next we have wildlife habitat restoration grants. And these support activities that create or enhance local habitat. So some samples include creating wetland, riparian, and tidal marsh habitats, protecting special status species, removing fish migration barriers, installing fish ladders, removing non-invasive species of plants, and planting native species. So again, this can be plant focused. It doesn't necessarily have to be animals. So for example, we had a grantee do a sycamore planting and then studied, and then they were able to produce a guide about caring for sycamores. And then we have another grantee that grows their own native plants, and then they go out with volunteers and students to plant and maintain the plants, make sure that they're thriving. For animals, we have one grantee that is currently doing a pond project, pond rehabilitation for red-legged frogs and native turtles. So for this one, if you are interested in this, take a look at the guidelines and the criteria, and one of the footnotes will be the One Water report. It's actually one of the attachments. It's attachment 4 in the grant guidelines. That'll provide you a little bit more detail. And then we'll go into more detail about the permitting and CEQA later in the slides, but it is something to be aware because this can be a factor in these type of projects. Okay, next slide. All right, so we have our example. This is establishing Foster's Terns. So this was with the San Francisco Bird Observatory. They're out like in the Alviso, Don Edwards area. And they helped reestablish nesting sites for Foster's Terns. So those are birds that were once abundant in the area. And they established nesting colonies by putting out decoys. As you can see the top photo there, those are actually fake birds painted to look like them. And then there are also speakers out there that play the bird calls. And so they've been able to attract more birds to the Alviso Pond A16. And so if you get a chance, if you're out there, keep an eye out and see if you see any of these birds. All right, next. Okay, this is our final one, final type. So this is access to trails and open space, and this was formerly D3 as well. And this provides new access to trails and open space. So some sample projects include construction of a bridge that link two trails together, the connection of a trail that provides a link to a creekside trail network, or activities that support urban trails and encourage community involvement. So one of our recent grantees is actually bringing in the community to make their urban trail more inviting. So that's pretty creative. So for this one, again, you want to look at the One Water report and the trail guidelines that are footnoted in the criteria. And we'll go a little bit more in depth with the permitting in CEQA, which may be a factor in this one as well. So next slide. So this is the Calero Reservoir Oak Cove Trail construction project that we did with the County of Santa Clara. And they constructed a new 5-mile trail around the Calero Reservoir. And since it opened in spring 2020, it's really enhanced the trail network out there and brought people out to see the beauty and to connect with the water out there, the reservoir. If you get a chance, it's a really nice trail, and there's a lot of cyclists that like to ride their bikes out there too. So definitely check that out if you get a chance. This one had an additional benefit, and that wasn't related exactly to the trail, but they did also plant native plants around the trail. So, you know, it wasn't strictly limited to the trail. Next slide. So this one is our Webb Creek Bridge that was done by Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. And so they constructed a new bridge over Webb Creek in the Bear Creek Redwoods Open Space Preserve. And it was part of a multi-phased trail rehabilitation and to provide access. So this bridge serves as a pedestrian bridge. So for the different people hiking or walking. And then it's also serves another purpose of being a bridge for emergency vehicles to get in and out of the park. So there is a safety element in that as well. All right, next slide. Okay, so we're gonna go now into the scoring criteria. So again, you'll wanna check out the standard grant guidelines. And the award recommendations are based on a panel of subject matter experts. They evaluate the applications and score them based on the criteria that's spelled out in the grant guidelines. So you'll want to check that out while you're putting together your application and scope and plan. Each of the 5 types that I mentioned earlier will have their own unique scoring. So again, you'll want to look at the priority area that you're applying for, because they have unique minimum requirements and unique evaluation. And then they'll score that, and based on that, you'll get a unique funding score. And the panel will make a recommendation based on that score to our board to approve for funding. If you score lower, there's a chance that you won't be funded the full 100%. Again, we don't know. That's really up to the board to decide. But that's kind of how they get at making their decision on who to fund and how much to fund. Staff is not involved in scoring the criteria, or the grant staff. That's done through the panel. And again, there are no secrets. They only evaluate on what's in the criteria. They cannot go outside of those lines. So again, when you're putting together your application, be sure to have that scoring metrics by your side and go through each line, and hopefully you'll see if you're hitting all of the marks. If not, you know, you might want to think about how you can modify your project slightly to perhaps score higher in different areas. Next slide. All right, so we do have bonus criteria. So this is extra credit. So you have your score for all of their required criteria, but every project type will allows for bonus criteria. So this would be extra points beyond what you scored. So let's say you score 80 points with the bonus. If you hit all of the bonus criteria, that would bump you up to 95 points. Again, it depends on the grant type and the scoring criteria. So you check that out. But we do have bonus criteria or bonus points available for financial stability. So if more than half of your required matching funds come from a monetary source instead of in-kind. And again, in-kind is like volunteer hours, so they're not funds. Or demonstrating strong financial ability to carry out the project. What is the likelihood that you can finish, based on your funding? Applicants that are first-time standard grant recipients. So if you've applied in the past and weren't awarded, you're still considered a first-time applicant. And if you've received any mini grants in the past, those also do not count. So if you've done either of those, you would be eligible for these points. If you have received a grant in the past, then you would not be, or your organization would not be eligible for this bonus point. And we also have environmental justice. So these bonus points are sort of all or nothing. There's 5 points for each. You either get the 5 or you don't. So check out the details in the grant guidelines. Next slide. So just to go a little bit more in depth in the environmental justice bonus criteria piece, Valley Water defines disadvantaged community either by low income households that have below 80% of the area median income, low income census tracts, so where the aggregate household income is less than 80% of the area median income, and then an area defined by the California Environmental Protection Agency, so using the Cal EPA's tool here. So later we'll be releasing our facts, so frequently asked questions, on our website. So check that out. These links are there. And they'll pull up 2 different maps. One will be from the Cal EPA, so the California Environmental Protection Agency, and then one will be from the census data. And so when you look at your project location, if the location or address falls within those shaded areas, then you would be eligible for that 5% or 5-point bonus. So again, it doesn't have to be in both. There is a lot of overlap, but they are 2 different areas. So if you see your area shaded, you're probably gonna qualify for this bonus criteria for environmental justice. And we're really looking to diversify the projects and to reach out to those communities. We want to create equal opportunities for everybody. And so we do take that seriously. So again, check out the facts. And then if you're really not sure or if you're confused, feel free to reach out to us, grants@valleywater.org. Next slide, please. All right, proposal requirements. Before I move on, do we have any questions? No, that's a lot of information. Okay. Next slide. All right. So the grant applications will open in January. So right now they're not open, but as soon as that date hits in January, you'll be able to go into the Flux grants management system and start plugging in your application. So there will be questions, and then there will be different attachments that are required. So you'll need to turn in your online application and answer all of the questions. Try to answer the questions as thoroughly as you can, because the questions are scored. They're part of the entire proposal. So we won't just be looking at the scope and budget, we'll also be looking at your answers to those questions. So be careful, and you can always save and come back in Flux, so take your time and put together a really thorough application. Make sure you have all of the required documents. And again, check out the standard grant guidelines. That's going to be your guide for what you need to turn in. We'll need a project scope, a schedule, and budget. We'll need a resolution from a governing body. So a resolution says that your governing body, so your board or however you're organized, is applying for a grant, and if they are awarded, that they will enter into an agreement with Valley Water for that. We do have a template that you can use. If you need language, you can copy and paste, and we'll also probably later on be providing a Word document if you need a template, but it is, let's see, attachment. It's 2, attachment 2. So that is a sample resolution. And you can fill in the blank and provide your organization's information. If you have issues or you're not sure if your organization even does a resolution, I would reach out because that would be specific to your organization. So again, you can email us at grants@valleywater.org. The audited financial statements, take a look at the grant guidelines. There's more detail about that in there of who's required to do that. And then we'll also need the W-9, Form 99, and then a resume of key staff that'll be working on the project. So again, if you are confused after reading the grant guidelines and the facts, the frequently asked questions, feel free to reach out to us because we can answer your project specific or organization specific questions. So you'll want to spend some time. Oh, next slide.
Sorry, I do have a question.
Okay.
If we have time. From Minette Castro, in the application phase, do we need to call out the bonus criteria items?
You probably should. I think one of the questions in the application is which community are you serving? So you want to include it in there. And then I would probably mention that in the scope as well when you're just describing your location. Good question. Cool. Okay. So one of the elements is a project scope, and you'll want to take some time putting this together because this will be the basis of your grant agreement. So a good scope would include all the elements that are listed in the grant guidelines. So make sure that you check all the boxes in the criteria, okay? But you'll want to include a project summary, just, you know, a brief overview of the project and the goals. So the location of where it's going to be. If it's going to be virtual, go ahead and indicate that. If it'll be multiple locations, you can include those as well. A lot of grantees will include like a map or a screenshot of a map. You could do that as well. You'll want to include the community served and demographics. So this is where you can really elaborate on your environmental or disadvantaged community environmental justice. This is kind of the area we'll be looking at. But we want to know, is there certain age groups that you're going to be reaching out to, certain communities you're going to be reaching out to. So you want to provide as much detail as possible. You don't want to leave anything out because, again, the evaluators, you know, won't be able to ask you questions. So you want to make sure that you cover everything in your application because that's what's going to be scored. Project partners, if you have any, for some of the criteria that can gain you more points. The project tasks. So the tasks are the different activities that you're going to do to achieve your project goal. So the approach. So if you were doing a creek cleanup, one task could be planning the cleanup. So planning involves getting the permits, figuring out which area, and then doing some of the outreach. And then the implementation. So the actual event could be one task, you know, hosting the event and having different volunteers and different supplies that you need for the event. And then you could have an educational piece. So when you think about your project as a whole, you'll want to kind of break it down into tasks, and each task should have some kind of metric or deliverable. So if you're doing a trash pickup, how many pounds of trash are you planning to pick up? And how are you going to measure that? How are you going to report it out? Another one would be if you're doing an educational presentation to some elementary schools. How do you know if you've achieved your goal? Well, you could do a pre and post survey of the participants. So that's one way to measure it. A deliverable then would be, you know, the PowerPoint that you put together or the lesson plan. Some people will forget sometimes to think about your plans for project operations, maintenance, and monitoring. So let's say you you plant some really nice trees, and then when the project is done in 2 years, who's going to watch the trees? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be a partner? Are you going to maintain them for 3 years? So will the project live on beyond this project? So if you're doing education, like it might be a year-long program, but it could live on. You could, pass it on to others or continue the curriculum. So just keep that in mind. And then the project team. So again, read the requirements for your priority area. If I were to put together a grant application and a scope, I would pull out the guidelines and I would look at the chart for the project I was applying for. And then I would go line by line and make sure that I address each and every piece that's going to be scored. Because again, you don't want to leave anything off the table. Once awarded, again, this will be part of your scope. So if you are awarded, this will be your contract, like what you're agreeing to do. We can make minor changes. We can negotiate, but you'll want to kind of have something somewhat fully baked here. The other piece is unknowns. So one big one that we've had lately is the COVID situation, shelter in place, social distancing. So what some of our grantees have done is if they're planning on having an in-person event, they may also have an alternative where they're going to do an online event if COVID is still an issue there. So if you're unsure how you're going to plan for the future, you can provide alternates. And if you receive partial funding, we may have to work with you afterwards to kind of reduce the scope. So if you had planned 5 events and you're only awarded 80% or 60%, then we could reduce that down to maybe 3 events. So we would work with you on that. Any questions before I move on? No, that's a lot of information. Okay. All right, tip number 2, again, look at the grant guidelines, okay? This is gonna help you create a good scope and make sure, again, that you don't leave anything out that might cost you points. Next line. Okay, so for the project schedule, you'll need to include that as well. And the first tip is that it really should match the scope and the budget. So if you're putting together a schedule, you by task, so task 1 is planning and then task 2 is a cleanup. You want to make sure when you're doing the schedule and the budget that the task 1 is planning and then the task 2 is the budget. So you want to make sure that everything's consistent and that there's no mismatch of information. You'll want to be realistic. As Kristen mentioned earlier, if you're awarded June 1st, you're not likely going to be able to start June 2nd. So just keep that in mind. And you're not going to be able to start some activities that are subject either to CEQA or permitting. So just keep that in mind. So I would assume your agreement could be executed around September or December, maybe earlier. It kind of depends on the complexity of the scope and the type of reviews that your project will need. And for the scope, you can use any format that you want. There's more detail in the criteria of what should be in the scope, so be sure to include those elements. The scope, the schedule, and the budget are scored for most of the project, not all of them, but for most of them. So again, keep that in mind. So what some grantees do too is they'll do a starting point and then they'll build off of it by months or weeks. So, okay, our start date in the spring, once we get the contract executed, then 2 months from then we'll have our planning done. And then 3 months from the planning, we'll have this done. So that's also an option. Again, we don't have, super strict criteria. We will post a template if you need one or on our website, but again, you can use whatever you want as long as it meets the criteria listed in the guidelines. And the project, as Kristen mentioned, needs to be completed in 5 years. per the agreement. But if your project really is the schedule is only going to take a year, that's fine. So build in a realistic schedule. If it's a year, that's fine. Put in a year. You're not going to, if things have to shift, you just communicate with us and work with us, and that shouldn't be a problem. Any questions about the schedule? Nope. Okay, great. Next slide. Okay, so we have the project budget. So this is always a fun one. So again, you want to match the task to the scope and schedule. You want to be realistic. Okay, so do your research. You will be scored on the budget for most of the criteria. And if your budget is inflated or deflated, it's likely going to be noticed. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that we're not able to increase the award amount. So if you put your budget for $10,000, just based on what you think it would be without really doing a lot of research and figuring out what things actually cost, and then the project, ends up being $20,000 and you ask for additional funds, you're not likely going to be able to get those. We won't increase the grant amount. So you'd have to kind of figure out other means of making up that difference. You can include the value of volunteer time. So if you take a look at the facts, the frequently asked questions, there's some information there. There's a website that you can check out. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think the value of a volunteer in California is around $30, but don't quote me on that. And you'll want to be really clear on your budget per task, because once we lock in that task, it's a lot harder to shift between those, but we can talk about that if you are awarded. Next slide. All right, so I'm gonna screen share real quick, just so I can give you a real quick overview. Again, it's gonna be really quick. So if you have questions specific to your project, then we can, you can go ahead and set up an appointment with us or give us a call. All right, so hopefully you can see this. So this is just a sample budget using our templates. Oop. So the templates will be in Flux when you're ready to use those. Oop. And all right, sorry, my toolbar was in the way. Okay, so this is a sample based on a creek cleanup. So you can include staff personnel services. You can include indirect overhead. Take a look at the grant guidelines. There's more detail about that in there. And then different supplies and contributions. So you see there are different columns here. So in this gray one, and there are formulas in the template. So just be careful when you're doing that, not to clear anything out because it might mess things up. But this would be the total cost of all of the employee hours and work it will take to complete the project. And then you'll put all the supplies and all the contributions. So that'll help you get your total project cost down here. So from there, once you have a really realistic idea of how much each item is going to cost you, your different supplies, you want to break up that total cost by how much you're going to be providing. If you have other contributions, so if you have a partner or you have other grants, you want to put them here. And then how much is the total for each line item that you'll be requesting from the district, right? So for example, we have this 23,000. So 7,000 is coming from the grantee, 7,000 is coming from another grant. And so they're going to request the remainder of 7,000 from Valley Water. So you plug those in there and you'll get, this would be your total grant amount. From there, you'll want to break these up by the different tasks that you have, right? So the supervisor will be working 20 hours on task 1 planning. They're going to be doing some implementation, so the hours would be there. And then the task 3 cleanup, they're going to be charging approximately 1,900, and then final report. So you'll plug that in. So again, this district funding only is per task, how much the line item is going to cost, and then you'll get your totals at the bottom. Kristen, is there something you wanted to mention?
No, just know that our actual, if you're awarded the funding, our invoicing template is almost identical to this budget template. So that's supposed to make sure that everything's aligned, and whatever you put in the budget template, just know that if you're awarded and we are doing the reimbursement process, we'll be looking for supporting documentation for everything that's in the budget. So if there's a direct cost, we'll need to see receipts. If there's labor hours, we'll need to see a pay stub or a time sheet or something like that. So, and if there's mileage or something, we have to see the start and end point and the date and description of what that was for. So just know keep that in mind when you're putting together your budget to know how it will be used in the future, potentially. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, good points. The other thing too is you want to put your in-kind. So again, go back and figure out what, if you're having volunteers, what is that volunteer hour cost? How many hours are going to be working? So you'll include that as a dollar amount in your contribution or partner contribution, but we won't reimburse on volunteer time. So just keep that in mind. So if there is volunteer time, we're not going to be able to reimburse for that. Okay, any questions about this? I know I went over this really quick. If you are finding that you're struggling putting this together, feel free to reach out. We're here, Valley Water. grants@valleywater.org. We also have our phone number at the end. You can call us. Okay, all right, so I'll let Renee put the presentation back up. Cool. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some of our other requirements and reviews. This, is going to be where it's project specific, but we'll provide some general guidance here. But if you have questions specific to your project, please reach out to us. So each project will need environmental review, whether it's a virtual project or not. One of our environmental planners will need to determine what level of review will be needed. And as staff, we can't make that, or as grant staff, we're not specialists, so we can't really make that determination for you. We're going to need a permit review to see which permits you might need from us or potentially from another agency. We'll need insurance and endorsements to accompany those insurance requirements. And then we'll need that completed scope, schedule, and budget along with the application. Next slide. All right, so I mentioned environmental compliance. So Valley Water must comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. You may have heard of CEQA. That's what it's referring to, California Environmental Quality Act. We'll need to analyze the project's potential impact to the environment. And we consider CEQA complete when the lead agency has filed the notice of determination or has documented that the project qualifies for an exemption. Next slide. So for our planners to make that determination and to provide speedy service, it's really important that you provide the information up front. You want to provide the project location and access routes, the species and habitat that could be affected, any ground disturbing activities, such as digging or planting, the work schedule, so like what season are you going to be out there, and then if you know of any potential environmental concerns that may exist. So provide as much detail as possible because you don't want to lose points or have us keep bugging you for more info. If you have CEQA completed, send that information in because CEQA is part of the criteria scoring. Even if Valley Water is not the lead agency, you want to turn in whatever you have for CEQA. And the size and the cost of the project isn't necessarily reflective or indicative of the required environmental review. So just keep that in mind. Even if it's a small project, we may have to provide certain documentation. Next slide. So CEQA does not need to be completed prior to the grant proposal or award. We'll work with you on that. However, if your proposal is further along in the CEQA process, CEQA review process, you may score higher. And those criteria versus those projects that aren't as far along. So it is in the grant guidelines. Take a look at that. And again, anything you have for CEQA, like if you've applied for CEQA, if you've been in communication regarding CEQA, go ahead and provide that information. And again, if you have any questions specific to your project, go ahead and reach out. But does anybody have any questions related to CEQA? And we'll help you too. So you don't have to do it all alone. Okay, great. Next slide. Permit compliance. So we will ask our permitting unit to do a permit review on all projects. But again, if something's virtual, it's probably not going to need a permit, but we'll just check in with our staff just to make sure. And we are required that you have all the proper permits needed to start project activities on private land, on public land, or Valley Water owned land. If you can show progress in obtaining the required permits, so like if you've applied for a permit or you've made inquiries, or if you have the permit, go ahead and include that information. You can also include it as an attachment in your application because you could be eligible for more points for that area. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. And again, provide as much detail as you can. And if you have permits from other agencies, feel free to include those. Any questions about permitting? And if you've never done a cleanup activity, just know a lot of times if it's near a creek, it'll require a permit. But again, check in with us. Next slide. And again, before you start work, we will need to ensure that you have the required permits either from us or from a permitting agency. Any questions about permitting? No. Okay, next we have insurance. Okay, so you're gonna, if you are awarded, you're gonna need to provide your insurance and endorsements. And you'll have to maintain insurance for the entirety of the project, not just, a couple months. So if the project is 2 years, you'll need insurance for 2 years. All of the details are in attachment 4, grantee insurance requirements in the guidelines. And these endorsements and insurance require approval before we execute the agreement. You can, right now, if you want, you can send that attachment 4 over to your broker and they might be able to give you some quotes, or you can start planning about how long it's going to take to get all the endorsements that you need. It's more than a simple one-page certificate of insurance. There are additional endorsements that will be required. And anything else? We could adjust the insurance requirements on a case-by-case basis. You'd need to reach out to us for that. But I would plan on having the full insurance. Any questions about the insurance?
I just want to clarify that the insurance requirements in the standard grant guidelines are to give you a heads up that if you're awarded and we are going to move forward with executing a grant funding agreement, at that time, we'll need to make sure you're in compliance with those insurance requirements that are in the grant guidelines. So we try to give people a heads up because, like Amy said, sometimes it does take time to get those things in place, or you have to have additional conversations with your broker. and get cost estimates and whatnot. But we don't need the actual insurance documents uploaded at the time of the application due date.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so again, you don't need the insurance to apply. You will need the insurance to sign the agreement once we get to that point. So you have time, but it's just something to keep in mind in your, planning for your project costs. All right, next slide. Okay, grant applications. We're opening it up January 3rd, and they're due March 4th. Again, the only way to apply is through Flux. If you have any issues with Flux, please feel free to reach out to us. But I encourage you to start your application early and to turn it in before the deadline in case you come into any technical difficulties or you need assistance logging in or any other technical difficulty that may arise. The instructions are in the guidelines, they're attachment 1. And you can set up your organization's profile now. That way you have your login and you're all set to go on January 3rd when we flip that switch and the application's open. Next slide. All right, so important reminders and summary. Read the grant guidelines. Develop your proposal using the criteria in the grant guidelines. Include all the required documents that are listed in the grant guidelines. Submit your proposal again through Flux according to the grant guidelines. We are going to be posting our facts, our frequently asked questions, soon on our website, and those are going to be updated regularly. So you want to keep those in mind and check them out. We'll be posting more questions as we get them there. And no proposal will be accepted after the due date. So again, you don't want to risk having technical difficulties or not being able to log in at the last minute. Tip 3, next slide. Again, you want to read those grant guidelines and the frequently asked questions to ensure that your application is complete, you've got everything, and that you have a great proposal. Next slide. Okay, we do have other grant opportunities that we'd like to plug now through our Safe Clean Water program. We have our mini grant program, which is up to $5,000 and per project, and this is available year round. What's different about this compared to the standard grants that I was just talking about is it's not reimbursement based. So you get half of it up front once we sign the agreement, and then the 50%, the remaining funds would be given once you complete the project. And this is intended to provide seed funding to encourage community engagement and activities in those 5 areas that we went through a little earlier. So they're all open now. Before, mini grants were only available for D3 and we had water conservation mini grants, but they're all open now. So water conservation and flood protection, environmental stewardship, you can apply for any of those, and we have a streamlined application. So it's a lot simpler than applying for a standard grant. It's like one application, there are a ton of attachments, and we'll review it right then and there. So you'll get a response pretty quickly. And then coming soon, we're super excited to announce our water bottle filling station program. That'll be coming in early next year, so January 2022. Check out our website and we will likely send out an announcement via email on that one as well. We're super excited about that one. Next slide.
We do have a question come in about the mini grants from Minette Castro. Sure. And I can answer this too. If you were awarded a mini grant in the FY21 cycle, are we able to apply for another? Is there a waiting period for something entirely different than what we were previously awarded? So to answer that, you can apply. There is no waiting period. You're welcome to apply anytime. The mini grant program is on a rolling basis. It's open year round until funding runs out. And as of right now, we have funding available. So you're welcome to submit an application now, as long as it's not the same project scope as what you've previously been awarded for.
Yeah. And if you take a look, I had mentioned earlier, we have a list on our website of the different projects that we've awarded, and there's a lot of mini grant examples. But again, we've opened up the criteria to all different grant types, so it's not limited to just habitat related grants. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're here if you need help. Again, look through the facts, look through the guidelines, but if you're struggling or you have questions specific to your project, you can always reach out to us at our phone hotline. If nobody answers, feel free to leave a message. We do check that regularly, so don't be afraid, we will get back to you. We're also available through email, grants@valleywater.org. And then check out our website, has a lot of resources, and it also has something new we're trying out. You can schedule an appointment with us, a 15 or 30-minute appointment to discuss your project and your questions. So that is a feature that's available on our website. Again, for full transparency, we're happy to answer your questions about applications or requirements or qualifications, but we can't unfortunately review your application ahead of time. And we can't tell you whether or not you'll be awarded. That's up to the board. So thank you again. Here to answer your questions if you have any. All right. I'll go ahead and thank everybody for joining us. We will be sending out a survey through SurveyMonkey. If you could let us know what you thought about the workshop, what was helpful, that would really, really help us improve the workshop and then provide possible workshops for future topics if we get a lot of requests for that. So thank you again for spending your morning with us, and wishing you good luck, and we'll stay on the line in case there's any other questions.
I've dropped the link to the SurveyMonkey in the chat if you all want to open that now and provide your feedback.
We can also unmute you if you have questions.
Please feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask a verbal question.
I also want to thank our subject matter experts for joining us today and being on standby to answer questions. We're very fortunate to have them join us.
And I believe we also, this is the first of 4 workshops that we're doing. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but I know our next one is next Wednesday, I believe, in the evening as well. All right,
great.
Maybe hang on in case there are any last questions coming in until 11, and then we'll sign off for now. But we hope everybody is thinking about some good projects and is able to submit a project proposal for this grant funding.